doing the moderation for, let's see. Hi, is she connected? Perfect. Let's see. Yes, I can see her over there. Good afternoon, Ulrika. Can you see us? Can you hear us?
I cannot see. I can see and I can hear you, but there is a bit of an echo. No, now it's better.
Now it's better. Let's see. We will bring you up to the main screen so that journalists in the room can actually look at you. It should be coming, I see, in a second or two. Perfect. Excellent. So now we can see you and we could hear you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. And thank you so much. We're pleased to have Ulrika Richardson, our humanitarian coordinator in Haiti. So she's here today joining us from Port-au-Prince in Haiti. And she will give you an update, as you can imagine, on the humanitarian situation in the country. Ulrika, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to brief you today on the situation in Haiti. In fact, since we last spoke last year, we have seen the situation go from just really bad to even worse, and we see indiscriminate violence still being, let's say, escalating in the country. We see particularly the capital of Port-au-Prince impacted by armed gang violence, but also the province of Artibonite, a little north of the capital. And in fact, we already saw 2023 as a very steep increase in terms of violence, indiscriminate violence, killings, murders, lynching, rape, and other forms of sexual violence. We saw a steep increase in 2023 as opposed to 2022. And unfortunately, 2024 started in a similar sort of a very tragic trend, where we had January 2024 being the most violent month since 2 years back. And I think that says a lot. And obviously we have impact of the violence means that people are being subject to very brutal and grave violations of their human rights. They are being subject to very brutal forms of sexual violence, including collective rape. And we've seen, in fact, a 50% increase in sexual violations as of between 2022 and 2023. Now, of course, these figures in terms of sexual violence, primarily against women and girls, we have to also realize that they probably don't reflect the entire picture, because women and girls and people in general are very afraid of reporting. They're afraid of retaliation because they actually very often need to cohabitate with gangs as they live. We see obviously a very steep increase in people that flee their homes. They have to abandon everything and basically either sleep on the street, be hosted by host communities, which already have very scarce resources, as we can imagine, but also be, let's say, camping out in schools, for example, right? So we have now 314,000 displaced people in Haiti, which is quite a stark number. And so what we also have assessed is that more or less 5.5 million Haitians are in need of humanitarian assistance. And that's quite significant if we consider that the country has between 10, 11, 12 million in terms of population. And we know that out of those, there are 4.4 million people and that's about 40% of the population, that actually face acute food insecurity. And we also know that 45% of Haitians don't have access to clean drinking water. So this, of course, this really puts a huge pressure on the population and the most vulnerable. Life is at risk as you step out of your house, even perhaps in your house. If you live in some of the most affected areas, really, you can be in harm's way, either stray bullets or particularly being targeted on by these armed gangs. So we launched yesterday our 2024 humanitarian response plan, and that was done then in the backdrop of this dramatic reality that I've outlined, and it's dramatic and it's extremely painful. And I would say it's absolutely disastrous for so many people in Haiti. But we launched the response plan with a financial envelope of $674 million, knowing that last year, despite, I think, a very important show of solidarity from the international community, we still only were able to achieve 34% of the financing need of last year. So obviously this year we insisted to say that, you know, the needs are greater, and hence the financial envelope is at the tune of 674 million, as I said. And we really count on a very robust mobilization of the international community. And of course, knowing that there are many tragic, unfortunately, situations that evolve around the world. Haiti is not the only crisis, but Haiti is passing through a moment. You can never compare one crisis with another. That's impossible. A human life is a human life. And in Haiti, too many human lives are actually being that suffer and that are lost in Haiti at the moment. And I would perhaps plea also particular eye on the children. We know that out are in need of humanitarian assistance in Haiti. 3 million of those are children. And these are children that very often, and now we see a great number of schools that cannot open all the time. So it's very erratic. We have more or less, at some point we have 1,000 schools not open during the month of January. And that means a lot to children and a generation that have already seen impacts on their schooling as of COVID, and then it was the pay lock in 2019 and another one in 2022. So let's remember them. But this is a call for increased solidarity. Haiti needs it. It's going through one of the most critical moments in its recent history. And I would count on all you in the room to help us to really spread that message across and make sure that we get a response that is greater than last year, but at least that helps us to do the needed life-saving and the protection that we look forward to with our response plan. But also knowing, and that's my last point, that humanitarian assistance is not a solution. It is a needed action right now in order to save lives, decrease suffering, and also increase the protection and service to those that have been affected. But we need to invest in the root causes, and that needs to be done in parallel, and which is also something that we are putting a lot of effort into. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'll end here and ready for the questions.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. Let me start with Edith Lederer from AP.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. As Stephanie said, Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. First, just a follow-up question. Could you tell us how much the appeal was last year? And was it lower? Can you tell me the figure?
Yes, I can tell you the figure. It was 720 million, so a little greater than this year.
And you said the needs are high. Why is the appeal lower?
Excuse me, can you repeat, Edith?
Yes. So last year was 720 million. This year is 674 million. But you said the needs are higher, so why is the appeal lower?
Well, it's a good question. We have, in fact, what we have done is we've really tried to be much more targeted. We have learned from what we've seen work. We have a very, I would think, a very good cooperation with local organizations. So we try to see where can we add best value, and also how can we rely better on local organizations. So the whole agenda around localization is something that we put a lot of emphasis on. And so this is basically in that package. We've also seen, what is something that we can sort of, when you look at it from the spectrum of the cross-pillar cooperation between humanitarian and development and peace, how can we basically see that we can work across those to basically differentiate of where a response can come from. So it's in that sort of mathematical equation, if you wish, that we arrived at the figure of 674.
And could you tell us whether the security situation, especially with the gangs, is impacting whether and how humanitarian aid can be delivered? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Edith. And I think we've sort of alluded to that in previous conversations in this forum. There is, of course, that the gang violence impacts and impedes, it limits humanitarian access. Notwithstanding, we have an access. We've been, since I arrived at least in the country in July, I arrived in June 2022. In July, we started very specifically to strengthen our access group, which is a mixed access group between, let's say, the UN agencies and the local and international NGOs. And through that access group and the strategy that we worked up of basically trying to map the capital and other parts of the city or of the country, we've actually been able to find ways of achieving access. So we have access. It is it's not a given access. It's vulnerable, and there has to be continuous assessments before we do operations. But we have an access that we want to protect, but we need more in order for us to achieve our target. And that's, that sounds totally, but in order for us to be able to help people that are in need with an unimpeded access, that is clear.
Maggie?
Oh.
Hi, Ms. Richardson. It's Margaret Bashir with Voice of America. My question to you is about the IPC reports in September that almost half the population was IPC3 or IPC4 levels of acute hunger. Where is it now? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Have you been able to help enough people to reduce the level of the emergency?
I think what we are seeing is that we don't have a new ICP yet, but what we could see, if you look at the trend, is that there are more people in acute need of food insecurity, or that more people in food insecure situation, right? But what we were able to do is to respond in such a way, and that is a proof also of our access, that we do have access, that we had some 20,000 people in IPC 5, you remember, this was in 2022, that we were able to address, so that we no longer have, in fact, people that are in that very dire, let's say, category. But yes, we have more people in food insecure situations in need of food assistance, and that is, of course, very fragile, because we also see that now the populations that are in IPC3 can easily move into the IPC4. We see, for example, an increased risk. We see increased numbers of malnutrition among children, and particularly pregnant women. And we also have done a foresight study in terms of what will the situation be in 2024. And there we see the risk of an increase in malnutrition. These are also indicators that could actually tell us that food insecurity will be a big priority for us as we move forward. And you will have seen also in the response plan that we have about 40% or actually 50% of the total appeal will go to assistance in terms of food security.
And could you just address how the closures of so many schools are impacting the children? Because I seem to recall there were school feeding programs when we visited. So with the kids not in school, they're missing meals. So I assume this contributes to it.
That's very true. And that's why it's so important that schools can remain open. The school feeding program is something that I find of extreme value, particularly as we combine it with local production, meaning you also do, there is an incentive for actually very local, economic activity. And even as we do that in the city, the aim to use local products is, of course, is much more emphasized now than previously. But to say that it is absolutely essential that the schools remain open for children to come to school, it's a sense of normality. There is a collective support that the school can provide that perhaps cannot be provided at home, and then it's the nutrition, of course, from the hot meat. So there is an impact, definitely, and we are doing everything we can to support the Ministry of Education to keep the schools open. And I must say that that's a constant effort, and there is quite a good. We see a good response. And we see now more and more schools being able to open as we speak, actually.
Let me go to Yvonne, then Michelle, and then we'll keep going.
Thank you, Yvonne Moriarty, News Ireland. I have two questions, if you don't mind. Firstly, you've described horrifying levels of sexual violence being carried out. This is something we've heard in UN reports frequently. My question is there any accountability for the perpetrators of these crimes, or are they just carrying it out with impunity at the moment? And my second question is with regard to the multinational force, the proposed deployment of this multinational force. What are the attitudes on the ground with regard to this deployment? Are people expecting it? Are they hoping for it? Do they even know that it's in the offing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, on sexual violence, much of this brutal sexual violence in terms of rape, collective rape, torture of women, that's very much, I would not be able to tell you a clear figure whether or not perpetrators, all of them go free. But many of them, because there is such a fear of retaliation. Because as I said, this happens very often in a neighborhood where people know each other and where the gangs have they know exactly where you live, where your family lives. So it's a lot of, it's very much also used in terms of, when you hold people hostage, negotiation. It's used as an arm to revenge between gangs. So I would say that fairly often too often, the perpetrator goes free. That is something that we are, in fact, also now looking at in terms of setting up a special, but that's in very early stages. So I'm not going to go into any detail, but we are setting up special courts that have a special capacity to deal with these cases. And we are encouraging, and to the extent we can, support women to at least make a report, so that once the judiciary becomes functional in that sense, we then have, we have elements to actually put cases forward. And then, so on the question on the MSS, you asked if what is the sentiment on the ground? The sentiment on the ground is like this: the country cannot continue. The level of violence that people are exposed to is inhuman. it cannot continue like this. If you would ask people on the street if they need assistance to deal with the gang violence, they would say yes.
You let me now go online. We have Jacqueline Charles from the Miami Herald. Let's see if we can hear. Jackie, are you able to turn your?
Yes, I'm there.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I have like a couple of questions. I know last year the appeal didn't really generate the kind of funding that we wanted. And so while launching this appeal, you're also launching an appeal for funding for the mission. And so I wanted to see if you can speak to, your concerns or, the possibility of having the international community actually step up. I mean, this is not a new challenge with Haiti, but everybody recognizes that the situation is dire, but we're not seeing the response as far as with donors. And the second question would be, last week there was a report about the rice that was being imported into Haiti and the high level of toxic metals. And I'm wondering whether or not the humanitarian sector of the UN is considering or taking that into account as far as, your food aid.
Thank you, Jacqueline. So on the first question, yes, the fund, these are two separate initiatives, right? And so from budgets of member states, here I'm speculating a bit, obviously, because we don't have the answer to this question, whether there is any, let's say, is there any contradiction between these two funding needs, if you wish? And so that's a bit of a speculation. But knowing how sometimes our budgets are being, let's say, placed in capitals, I would imagine that they come from different pots of money, right? So I think on the contrary, what we can see is that there is an interest from donors, those who provide a support to the MSS, this non-UN multinational support mission to Haiti, in terms of financing for equipment, etc. They are also equally very interested and very engaged here on the ground in terms of humanitarian assistance, because they know that, in fact, we need to work on all fronts. And Jacqueline, we know that too, right? We need to work on all fronts in order to help and accompany this beautiful country to let's say, to get back on its track in terms of progress and a life in dignity. So I think that there is not a contradiction between these two. I think on the contrary, I think we could actually hope for a positive spillover in that sense. Now, coming to your question on the rights, I don't have an answer. I've seen a response to that report in terms saying that were questioning the results of that study. So far, I cannot give you any feedback on that. But of course, we are following very closely and reading what is being published. Thank you.
Let me come back to the room. Stefano has a question.
Thank you very much. Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York. In Haiti, there's been now in the last at least 3 years, the demand for election and political election. Now, I understand you are you're doing humanitarian work there, but talking about the sentiment of the people, how do you feel the people there is considering this government that has been there legitimate? I mean, do they feel there is the time to change, to have election and change the government, or they don't think he's something important at the moment?
Well, I would say perhaps two things on this. Is that one thing is that people who are being forced to flee their homes, sleep on the street, not be able to go to school, not be able to go to the healthcare, not be able to put food in front of their children every day. I don't think that, you know, this is not the priority for them, right? If I would be so blunt. So that's one thing, that there is a general agreement across the board that there is a need to encourage the engagement of all stakeholders in this process of preparing for elections, so that there can be elections at the end of the day that are free and that are transparent and as just as possible. So there's a general agreement across the board that is needed. Haiti needs to get back on its track towards with a democratic, let's say, process and full constitutionality.
Thank you. One final question, and PR.
Excuse me.
I'll
Thank
take you.
you, Linda Fasulo. I had a question about donors. Who are for example, the top 3 or top 5 donors, and what kinds of money are they providing? And secondly, which countries have withdrawn aid? You know, have reduced their aid over the past year, or is it status quo?
Well, I would say that our most, let's say, in terms of figures, right, not proportional, but in terms of figures, contributions, it is the US, it's EU, and it's Canada. And so those are the most important in terms of contributions to our response plan. But there are many others. And in fact, I cannot, off my hat, say that we've had certainly no one that withdrew and decrease. I haven't seen, in fact, but don't quote me on that one, please. But to say that we have, in fact, we have new donors that are expressing interest, and what we are doing in order to facilitate smaller, let's say more modest contributions, but equally important, right, is to set up a regional pool fund that will actually be able to pool these a bit more modest amounts, so that we can actually, in fact, facilitate for member states who would like to demonstrate their solidarity in terms of contribution to the humanitarian response plan. So that's something that we're doing. So I would say I'm extremely grateful. And I know that, in fact, yes, we got 34 or 35% last year. Now, I know, and I don't like to compare things, but there are countries that receive less than that. So I would think that, okay, we need to do better. And we need to facilitate also for member states to be able to give perhaps more modest amounts. And that's what we are doing.
Let me now, final question to Benno.
Thank you so much for the briefing. Benno Stingheimer with the German press agency. You told us already many figures and many numbers of how dire the situation is, but like, I wonder if you can also give us like a personal eyewitness account of what you see every day. How difficult is it for you to move around in the country? What do you see? Is like, how do people get their hands on food and fuel? How's everyday life in Port-au-Prince?
I would say that I've seen things here that I've never seen in my life, and I've worked 30 years in the UN system. And it is the pain that a lot of women, children, men across the population are facing and subject to. The suffering and the pain is I would say is daunting. It's appalling. But it depends also where you live in the capital, right? So, you know, on the Saturday, you would see that parts of the capital, people go in their car, they go to the supermarket and see what they can find, and then they go back home. Normally, we move around in armored vehicles as the UN personnel, and myself, but I can move around, you know, in the capital. Sometimes it requires more security than other times. But what is quite daunting here is that you can't take the car and go freely to other parts of the country. And here I'm not talking about me or about us as the international community. In fact, the capital is in a way, being blocked because the national roads that go to the north and to the south, and also to the interior, these are actually very often controlled by the gangs. So either you are ready to pay a big price in terms of a monetary contribution, it's sort of like an unofficial criminal tax, or you risk your life. And it also means that these roads, national roads, are not, they're not maintained, right? So movement of people and goods in this country has taken a big toll as a result of the gangs. But I can say that what I've witnessed here, and many with me, including Haitians, it goes beyond even what you could have feared in your worst nightmare.
Well, on this bleak note, thank you so much, Ulrika, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And I will hand over to Stefan, who will now go ahead with the regular noon briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Thanks.
On that note, a few travel announcements to share with you. The Secretary General will be traveling to St. Vincent and the Grenadines tomorrow morning for an official visit to the country and to attend the 8th Summit for the Community of Latin America and Caribbean States. At the opening of the summit on Friday, he will highlight the importance of solidarity in the region to find solutions to common problems such as armed conflict, organized crime, getting countries back on track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and addressing the climate emergency. The Secretary General is expected to meet with the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, and other leaders who are attending the summit. He will also visit an area impacted by the eruption of the Soufrière volcano a few years ago, and to see some of the ongoing reconstruction efforts, including on infrastructure, housing, and reforestation. The Secretary General will be back in New York on Monday. For her part, our Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohamed, will be traveling to Sao Paulo in Brazil to attend the G20 Foreign Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting. The meeting comes at a critical time when the economic outlook across countries is diverging, with many of the world's poorest countries struggling to service their debts. In Sao Paulo, Ms. Mohamed will advance the Secretary General's call for reform of the international financial architecture, support the SDG stimulus, and to enable countries to recover from the setbacks to development caused by the recent shocks to the global economy. Ms. Mohamed, Deputy Secretary General, will be back here in New York on Friday. Couple of peacekeeping updates for you from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The UN peacekeeping mission in that country has handed over a first base to the government as part of its disengagement plan from South Kivu. The base was established in Kamanyola in 2005 and will now be managed by the Congolese National Police. The head of our peacekeeping mission, Bintu Keita, praised the commitment and work of the Pakistani peacekeepers who for 19 years have worked to protect civilians in coordination with the National Defense and Security Forces. In Kamanyola, the peacekeepers have supported the establishment of local protection committees, bringing together communities working alongside the local authorities on issues of security and protection of civilians. A community early warning system is also now in place there. And as we mentioned in the past, the joint memorandum signed in November last year by the Congolese government and the UN peacekeeping mission identified South Kivu as the first province from which it is to withdraw as part of an orderly, responsible, and phased withdrawal from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And just north in the Central African Republic, our peacekeeping colleagues there report that in response to incidents and alerts in Zemio and in surrounding the Obumu prefecture, which is in the southeastern part of the country. UN peacekeepers working in close cooperation with the Central African Armed Forces took immediate steps to protect civilians in these localities and to restore calm. The situation deteriorated in Zemio following a recent attacks on Kere village by the Azande militia, which killed 5 civilians. There are also reports of intercommunal tensions and risks of clashes between the Azande militia and other armed groups in the area. Meanwhile, peacekeepers on patrol detected the presence of armed individuals in a village close to the town of Amdafok in the Vakaga prefecture, which is on the border of Sudan. The individuals fled the area towards the Sudanese border when they were confronted by UN peacekeepers. As we've been reporting, the mission recently established a temporary operations base in the town of Amdafok, close to the border with Sudan, to secure the area and protect civilians and help reduce tensions. And a note on the humanitarian situation in Sudan. A shipment of wheat donated by Ukraine to the UN World Food Programme's Sudan operation has arrived in Port Sudan and is now being loaded onto WFP trucks for emergency food distribution. The shipment, part of Ukraine's Humanitarian Grain for Ukraine initiative, was made possible by the German Federal Foreign Office, which covered the entire operating cost of 15 million euros. The 7,600 metric tons of flour will be provided to families, many of whom have fled their homes due to the fighting and are struggling every day to meet their food needs. WFP notes that nearly 18 million people face acute food insecurity in Sudan, of which nearly 5 million are in emergency levels of hunger. WFP has already provided around 7 million people with emergency food and nutrition support since the conflict began in April, yet the needs are continuing to grow. And yesterday afternoon in the Security Council, you heard from Ramesh Rajasingham, the Director of Coordination for OCHA, and he told Security Council members that at least 576,000 people in Gaza, that's 1/4 of the population, are one step away from famine, with 1 in 6 children under 2 years of age in northern Gaza suffering from acute malnutrition and wasting. Practically the entire population of Gaza is left to rely on woefully inadequate humanitarian food assistance to survive. He said the UN is continuing to ceaselessly plan, search, and call for solutions to overcome the hurdles that would allow us to scale up delivery and health services. In the immediate term, this includes clearer security guarantees, a better humanitarian notification system to minimize risk, fewer restrictions on telecommunications equipment, and the removal of unexploded ordnances and the use of all possible entry points into Gaza. Carl Scow, the Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Programme, told Council members that Gaza is seeing the worst level of child malnutrition anywhere in the world, adding that WFP is ready to swiftly expand and scale up operations if there is a ceasefire agreement. In the meantime, the risk of famine is being fueled by the inability to bring critical food supplies into Gaza in insufficient quantities and the almost impossible operating conditions faced by our colleagues who work in Gaza. Sherwin.
Jeff, thank you so much. Yesterday in the council meeting that you just referred to, the Israeli envoy said that Israel was doing all it can for civilians, going above and beyond what was expected, let alone required in Gaza. He then sought to lay the blame for the lack of humanitarian aid in Gaza firmly at the UN's door, right? He said the limitations on the quantity and pace of aid are dependent on the capacity of the United Nations and other agencies to receive, store, and distribute the assistance efficiently. In recent days, over 508 trucks have been waiting on the government side of Kerem Shalom and Rafah crossings. It's not Israel who's holding up these trucks. They've already been approved. So he's pointing to inefficiencies within the UN. How do you respond to that?
I mean, first of all, I would say that the UN is not a party to this conflict, right? We are not the ones doing the fighting. And that's why we've repeatedly asked for a humanitarian ceasefire. Yes, there are trucks that have crossed from Israel into Gaza. The situation in Gaza is, as we've described it numerous times, almost impossible for us to do humanitarian work. There is an active conflict going on. There's a lack of, there's a breakdown of law and order. There is insufficient coordination on the security end, on deconfliction with Israel. We've laid out all the challenges. That doesn't stop us from working. It doesn't stop our colleagues who are on the ground, Palestinians, international staff, of putting their lives at risk to distribute humanitarian aid wherever they can. But it is a distribution, it is an opportunistic distribution, as opposed to one that should be better funded, better organized, and more efficient if there was a ceasefire. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. This isn't, just as a follow-up to Sherwin, this certainly isn't the first time that the Israelis have accused the United Nations of basically not doing what they're supposed to be doing to deliver
That is indeed
aid.
a fact, yes.
Has this message been delivered personally to any senior Israeli officials?
Our humanitarian colleagues are in daily, if not constant, contact with their Israeli counterparts, right? So there are things that are being said here in New York, and then there are things that we're trying to make happen on the ground. But I mean, I thought my list to Sherwin was fairly exhaustive. The challenges are real. And the challenges are life-threatening for those who distribute the aid, and they're life-threatening for those who are trying to receive the aid. Amélie, then Dish Towel Man.
Thanks, Steph. Just on Gaza as well, about the famine situation. Yesterday, the OCHA and WFP representative said clearly that there is an imminent famine coming in the north, and that widespread famine in the whole territory is almost unavoidable. But can you walk us through how would a famine be declared? What is the process, and who would do that? What are the...
Well, I mean, there are set procedures that involve WFP, FAO. There's a UN system through monitoring and the gathering of information, and there are different phases. What's called the IPC, different levels. So they are working. WFP and our colleagues are working with the information they can gather, based on what they see and what they're being told on the ground. Benno.
Thank you. On the same topic, we all heard yesterday how difficult it is for you and how dire the situation is to get aid into Gaza through the border crossings. And I understand that airdropping humanitarian aid is kind of the last resort for you guys, but aren't we at this point?
I mean, they are, obviously, ideally, we want to have more routes available to us within Gaza, more routes available in terms of access into Gaza, and in absence of this, I mean, WFP, which would be the lead, is looking at all options. But I think we all understand and see the risks in doing that. I mean, I think the pictures that we saw, I think yesterday, the last days, I mean, I think kind of tell the story of the risks. Ibtisam.
A follow-up on the subject, or two follow-ups. First, regarding the statement of the Israeli representative, he was talking about 500 trucks that got the permission and waiting for the UN to distribute the aid. Can you confirm that this is correct?
I don't know if there's, I don't know the exact number, but what I do know, and I think we've tried to explain this as clearly as possible, is that trucks make it through a checkpoint, right? They have to then be unloaded and reloaded into trucks that can move into Gaza, right? So the trucks that come in from Israel, that come in from Egypt through Rafah, will not be those vehicles that circulate or try to circulate through the jammed streets of Gaza. Those have to be Palestinian trucks and trucks based in Gaza. Those trucks are smaller and they aren't enough. And we also have the issue of the lack of security for the cargo, and lack of security for our humanitarian workers.
Just a quick follow-up. When you talk about lack of security, you mean by that the fact, or do you mean by that the fact that you don't have a ceasefire?
Well, we don't have a ceasefire, and there was the de facto authorities in Gaza had a form of police that would be escorting a lot of the humanitarian convoys, and as far as I know, those are not operating.
Okay, I have another follow-up on the issue of airdrops. The Jordan and France and I think other countries did different operations. There was critique by local journalists and activists on the ground in Gaza that some of these airdrops ended up in water. Some of the helicopters or the airplanes had also influencer on them, that a lot of show happening, and like it's more of that it's not getting the benefits that it's needed. And there were some questioning about the purpose of these airdrops in the sense of that there's more showing off that this is happening than the amount of aid is really getting there. And the question here, if you have any comments on that, but also if you talk to these countries to make more airdrops in areas like northern Gaza, where's the aid more needed than.
Look, first of all, I will not question the good intentions and the goodwill of all member states who are trying to help, right? The more coordination there is between member states and ourselves on humanitarian operations, the better it is. I think the pictures of the airdrop tell the story. I mean, I can only speak for WFP's own experience and our own experience. Airdrops are extremely challenging, and they are, but they are an option. I mean, I think we all remember the challenges around Deir ez-Zor in Syria, and those challenges. So ideally, we want to move things by road. We want more roads open. We want more entry points open. But as I said, all options remain on the table for WFP. Dennis.
Good afternoon, Stefan. So Congress of Transnistria adopted a resolution with regards to Russia to implement measures to protect this republic amid growing pressure from Moldova. This document also calls on UN chief to prevent any further escalation between Moldova and Transnistria and contribute to reviving a full-fledged dialogue between the Dniester banks. Do you have any comment on that?
I've seen the press reports. We're trying to get a bit more information. I hope to have some answers for you a bit later today.
And the second one, President of Turkey, Tayyip Erdogan, told that Turkey works with Iran on framework for secure navigation in the Black Sea. Can you provide some details about it?
We continue to do whatever we can to work on freedom of navigation in the Black Sea to ensure greater access to world markets of those products that come out of the Black Sea. Michelle.
Thank you, Steph. Just a follow-up on yesterday's council meeting as well. At the end, the Russian and US envoys kind of had a bit of a back and forth where they were essentially picking apart each other's credibility to discuss various topics. What does the SG think about this? You know, he's spoken about the...
Between the Russian envoy and the US envoy. Deji.
Yeah, a follow-up first on airdrop. Let me put this question simple. Does the UN think now there's condition for airdrop humanitarian aids there?
All due respect, Deji, I think I've answered
Yeah,
that
you
question
said
repeatedly.
it's challenging, right?
And I also said that we want more access within Gaza. We want more access into Gaza because that's our preferred option. But I also said everything remains on the table.
Okay. Second, you constantly told us the UN staff has been in contact with the Israeli counterparts on almost daily basis. Given the fact that we all heard the briefers yesterday in the Security Council on the humanitarian delivery obstacles and everything, how effectiveness do you think those conversations with the Israeli counterpart have?
Everyone is, we are working in good faith. It's a very challenging situation, and we continue to engage. Gabriel, Dimitro, and then Nabil, and then we'll go to everybody. Don't worry.
Thanks, Steph. Appreciate it. More on the briefing from yesterday. WFP, I'm sorry, mentioned trying to resume deliveries back to the north of Gaza, and they're working on this, urgently exploring all viable delivery options. But if there was a viable delivery option, presumably they would be doing it right now. So what, can you give any more details about time frame?
This is about better security coordination, right? This is about the situation on the ground. So just because it doesn't exist today doesn't mean that they aren't trying to create those conditions, working with everyone they need to create those conditions. Dimitro, please go ahead. Sorry, sorry, I missed. Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
My name is Volodymyr.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. Somebody,
It's all right. Financial Times claims Russia conducted exercises with a rehearsal for the use of nuclear weapons in case of a Chinese invasion. The newspaper refers to classified documents leaked by the Russian Defense Ministry. Do you have any comments?
We have no comments on leaked documents, obviously, but I think the Secretary General has been very clear about his fears and his criticism of nuclear weapons. Nabil.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. Yesterday in the Security Council meeting, in the Arab group statement, the PR of Tunisia, who is the president of the group for this month, he said that the Arab group opposes any attempts to expand the mandate of the special coordinator, Mrs. Ka'ak, to the detriment of UNRWA. Does the SG share the same concern?
Two different things. I mean, nobody. I mean, first of all, Ms. Ka'ak has a mandate given to her by the Security Council, right? That's council members created that mandate. We named her. She's doing whatever she can to fulfill her mandate. As far as I read the resolution, her mandate is not to replace UNRWA. That is not her mandate.
But I mean, because UNRWA is now facing a lot of obstacles and on many levels, does the SG think that if UNRWA cannot provide the services it's mandated to provide, that some of these services could be done by other entities in the UN?
We've been through this. In terms of the UN, there is no getting around UNRWA to provide the services that it provides. And I think every UN humanitarian entity working in the region will tell you the same thing.
And last question, the GA is expected to discuss UNRWA on Monday, I think. So what does the SG, how is he preparing for this meeting?
Well, I mean, we want to see greater solidarity towards UNRWA, and that solidarity would be best expressed through helping its funding. Linda, then Mushfiq.
Thank you, Steph. Earlier you said, and we know the humanitarian conditions are dire, but that there's looting and theft going on. And I was just wondering, how significant is the theft and looting? And for example, like do they have a sense of what portion of the aid is being taken?
I don't have a
percentage.
I don't have a percentage. I mean, part of it, and the large part of it, people who are taking it are people who are hungry, right? I mean, I can only start to imagine what it would be like if I found a truck full of food when I was hungry, and not knowing, and that truck was made to wait hours at a checkpoint. At some point, I would probably take stuff myself, And there are also criminal elements that are stealing it. And this is all part of the breakdown of law and order that we've been talking about. Mushfiq.
Thank you, Steph. Given that over 25,000 opposition party members were arrested in Bangladesh before the sham election in January 7, and 13 have died in the custody, and only a few released due to international pressure. So will you call for the releasing the rest of the prisoners?
I think we've been very consistent, and we continue to call for the release of all those who may have been detained for merely expressing themselves peacefully.
One more on.
Go ahead, sorry.
How is the UN monitoring Nobel laureate Professor Muhammad
I mean,
Yunus' situation in
our
Bangladesh?
country team in Bangladesh continues to follow that case very closely. Professor Yunus is a dear friend of the United Nations throughout his career, and I think his work has been critical to the development work we do today.
Thank you.
Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stefan. I have a few questions. Since Secrétaire was appointed as a special coordinator, do you see that the scale up of the humanitarian aid went up or didn't?
I mean,
change
Abdelhamid, you pay as much attention to these briefings as I do. I think you know the answer. You know the answer to that question, and Mr. Lazzarini has been very clear. The aid has not gone up. I don't think anyone would blame Ms. Kag for that fact. Your next question.
So does it mean that her mandate is not being fulfilled?
It does not mean that. She continues to do her utmost to fulfill her mandate.
Okay, my second question. I know what's going on in Gaza is humongous, and it covers every other news in the world. But what's going on in the West Bank, Mr. Dujarric, is also immense. 3 Palestinians were killed yesterday and 3 wounded. Every single day, the number of people killed since October 7 exceeded 570, I think. And hardly it makes it to the noon briefing or to the statement or to the comments.
I think, Abdelhamid, we report back regularly on what goes on in the West Bank. Okay, I see.
I know.
I see, Mr.
One more.
Yes, one last one. Go ahead.
There is a news that the British Petroleum signed a contract with Israel to explore the gas depots on the shores of Gaza. Do you have any confirmation or any?
I do not. I do not. I had not seen that report. Mr. Roth.
Thank you, Stefan. I was just doing some day trading. I have a question from my colleagues overseas. I think I've shared with you. A CNN investigation out today, no need to take off the scarf, has detailed in an unprecedented detail amount how indiscriminate fire by the Israeli Defense Forces led to the death of over half the members of one family over the course of one harrowing night in early January. Does the UN Secretary General believe this is an appropriate use of military force?
Look, I saw the harrowing images that CNN reported on. It is yet another vivid and tragic illustration of the price that civilians are paying in Gaza, that families are paying in Gaza, that children are paying in Gaza. And yet another example of why we need a humanitarian ceasefire. And another example why we keep calling for the protection of civilians. Civilians cannot be a target. Civilians need to be protected. And we call for a full investigation into what was reported. We from ourselves have no information as to what happened in these events, but they need to be investigated. And I think as we've also said, there needs to be more reporters let into the area. Gabriel, Deji, and then we're going to call it. And then Evelyn, and then we'll let Monica speak.
Thanks, Steph. Thanks for coming back to me. I appreciate it. I just had a follow-up on Ms. Cog. Yesterday marked 2 months since she was appointed into her current role. Can you just characterize how will the Secretary General judge if she's fulfilled her mandate or not? Will it just be on how much aid gets into Gaza in the future, or are there other parameters he's looking at as well?
I think the goals and the parameters of her mandate were set very clearly in the resolution. It will be up to the Security Council to make that decision. Ms. Cog and her team have been working intensely traveling throughout the region, talking to the right people, engaging with different authorities. And in due course, she will report back to the Security Council, and I'm sure council members will express their opinion on her work. Deji, then Evelyn.
Several clips of alleged Israeli soldiers looting in Gaza were online for a couple of days. What does the Secretary General's position on this looting?
I think all of these cases need to be investigated. I've seen reports that the Israeli army is investigating these cases, but obviously all of these cases, any possible violation of rules need to be investigated.
But is this could these clips be the evidence for war crime?
It's not for me to judge that. Evelyn.
Excuse me. Thank you, Stefan. Since UNRWA can do nothing right, and all sorts of politicians and officials are finding reasons to discredit it, when do you think, excuse me, you'll have the first either OIOS or someone else's report that you could counter some of this?
Well, I can't.
It seems to be easy to knock on.
I can't prejudge what OIOS will find. I can't prejudge the findings of the independent review, but both are being worked on as quickly and efficiently as possible. Thank you, Monica. All yours.
Thank you so much, Steph, good afternoon, everyone. I have 3 notes for you, and we will be out of here. So, the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Dennis Francis, is in Nairobi, Kenya, to take part in the opening of the 6th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, UNIA 6. The PJ will deliver remarks at the high-level segment, which will take place tomorrow, 29th February, at 10 a.m. local time, so which is going to be 2 a.m. here. The overall theme of UNIA 6 is effective, inclusive, and sustainable multilateral actions to tackle climate change, biodiversity, loss, and pollution. Mr. Francis will draw attention to the fact that biodiversity is degrading at the fastest rate in history, and that the outcome of UNIA 6 must progress towards ensuring everyone's right to clean, healthy, and sustainable development. Today in Nairobi, he held bilateral and separate meetings with the head of the United Nations country team, Mr. Stephen Jackson, and the Director General of the UN office in Nairobi, Ms. Zainab Hawa Bangura, as well as with the President of UNIA 6, Ms. Leila Ben-Ali, before heading to a dinner meeting with UNEP Business and Industry Major Group. And we will bring more updates for you as they happen via your email. On Monday, 4th March, the General Assembly will hold a plenary debate on use of the veto, item 63, special report of the Security Council. The debate on the use of the veto at the meeting of the Security Council held on 20th February, you may remember, under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question, will take place at 10 a.m. in the GA Hall and will be webcast by UN TV. PJ Dennis Francis will chair the plenary debate. And now, this morning, President Francis sent a letter to member states informing that he will convene an informal plenary meeting of the General Assembly on Monday, 4th March, at 3 p.m. to hear a briefing from Mr. Filippo Lazzarini, Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees. The meeting will take place at the GA Hall, and there will be no pre-established list of speakers. Due to the limited time available, time limits for individual statements will be 3 minutes and 5 minutes for statements on behalf of groups. And as you know, the PJ will be there. And finally, PJ Dennis Francis has selected the members of the judging panel following the nominations received from the co-chairpersons of the Steering Committee for the UN SIDS Partnerships Awards. The PJ's selection of members is in accordance with General Assembly resolution, and the following members will be working on this panel. Mr. John Gilroy, Ms. Kerita White, Mr. John Gilroy, I should say, is the first secretary of the Permanent Mission of Ireland. Ms. Kerita White is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Barbados. Dr. Ibrahim Zuhuri, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Maldives. Ms. Fiona Indo, Deputy Permanent Representative of Solomon Islands. And Ms. Kate Brown, she's the Executive Director, Global Island Partnership, as well as Dr. Satesh B. Daisy, Professor and Associate Dean, School of Graduate Studies, St. George's University of Grenada. And additionally, two other members, there will be Mr. Sainivalati Naboti, who is the Chief of SEEDS Unit at UNDESA, but also Ms. Tishka Francis, Head of SEEDS Subprogram, will act as ex-official members of the panel. The award will be presented to 3 partnerships in recognition of their contributions to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Priorities of SEEDS. So this is everything we have for today. We'll be back here on Friday, so no room briefing or video briefing, I should say, tomorrow. But you will receive the PJ's speech from us through your email. By the time you wake up tomorrow, the speech will be there. So, hey, how are you today? I go to Ibsen afterwards, yeah, and I'll have all of you. Ibsen, how are you today?
Thank you. So my question is regarding the meeting Monday, the UNRWA meeting Monday at 3 p.m. Does this come in context of the letter that Mr. Lazzarini wrote to the General Assembly about the situation of UNRWA? And what does that first this part.
No, sure. You are absolutely right. Mr. Lazzarini wrote a letter to the PGA. The PGA received the letter and we informed you all when it happens. However, this is a meeting that was requested by a member state, Tunisia, in their capacity as chair of the Arab group. So the request came from a member state, in this case, Tunisia.
Okay, so
sure.
So does that mean, okay, then my question is about the letter that Mr. Lazzarini sent. Would that mean, what does it mean for the General Assembly in this case regarding the UNRWA mandate, given the fact that it comes from the General Assembly?
Sure.
And do you expect any outcomes from it? And does the letter activate, or I don't know, any steps by the General Assembly that need to be taken in such situation?
Sure.
Thank you.
Look, I think things are happening in a crescendo, right? As if you can say this. So the PJ received the letter of Mr. Lazzarini, and Mr. Lazzarini is coming. By the way, he's coming here to the General Assembly. He'll be here on Monday in person to brief member states. The PJ, of course, will meet Mr. Lazzarini, and I will have updates for you. The PJ is very concerned about what is happening right now. He sees UNRWA, Ibsen, as a lifeline for 2 million Palestinians. And what is happening right now is that Palestinians who are in need of help and humanitarian assistance are not getting it. And the PJ is following these developments, will be announcing action or more updates on this in due time. And the fact that Mr. Lazzarini is coming to New York to brief member states is also connected with what is happening. And of course, the concern of the PJ is extremely distressful, what is happening right now. And the PJ would like to take or make his judgment based on the information that he will receive from Mr. Lazzarini, of course, in consultation of member states. Okay, I have to go by order, okay? Edie, and then I have Amélie, and you, Nabil. And of course, how are you?
I was going to ask the same question, but now that Ibtisan has a follow-up, is there a speakers list yet? And if not, can we find out the speakers list when it becomes available?
Unfortunately, for this meeting, Edie, we won't be able to send a speakers list because there won't be a speakers list. So delegations will be invited to press the microphone button to request the floor. We will find out when the meeting is happening. The meeting will be on webcast. But delegations speaking on behalf of groups, they should approach the Secretariat to be given priority. But it will be happening as the meeting takes place.
Is President Francis planning to speak at the opening?
He will be there. He'll be chairing the meeting. We'll be updating you on this, definitely.
Is he going to deliver any remarks?
That's what I have to get back to you on this, but he will be there, and we will update you on the remarks, okay? If he will deliver them. Okay, so I have Amelie, and then, good. Yes, has been answered. Wonderful. I go to Deji, and then Nabil, and Mushabik, you are on my list.
Let me ask you about another meeting,
Sure.
the veto meeting. Do you have a schedule for that now?
Which meeting?
The veto.
The veto. Sure. It's at 10 a.m. Also, it will be webcast by UNTV.
It's 10 a.m. on Monday.
10 a.m. on the 4th of March, and the PJ will be there as well. The PJ will chair both meetings.
So they will have two meetings. In the morning, it's about the veto, and in the afternoon, it's about UNRWA.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Absolutely. Okay. Nabil, Mushabik, and Volodymyr. Nabil goes first.
Thank you.
By order. Sorry about this. I'll be back.
So I think the request was that the meeting on UNRWA to be held this week. So can you explain why the PGA decided for the meeting to be on Monday?
Sure. The schedule of meetings in the General Assembly, they are made in consultation of member states with also the schedule of the PGA. So it has been decided that will be taking place on Monday afternoon. Yes.
And I don't know if you talked about this before, but what's the PGA's position on firing a number of UNRWA's employees based on allegations, Israeli allegations, especially that the UNRWA is mandated by the General Assembly, and they were fired almost immediately. So what's his position on this?
I think the PJ spoke about that, including in interviews where he was asked. And what he said is, but there is a case of investigations taking place, they should take place, and he will speak about the result of an investigation or investigations when they are ready, not before. So we're not going to interfere with any investigations.
And maybe
Sure.
last question. So what does he hope to achieve from the briefing on Monday on UNRWA?
Well, the PJ supports the work of UNRWA. Yeah, UNRWA has been doing good work with the Palestinian refugees for decades in the history of this organization. And he would like to listen to Mr. Lazzarini and also to listen to member states. And he will continue in what he said before, public, but also in private, continue to support the work of UNRWA. Yes, Mushbek.
Thank you,
and
Monica.
And then you, Volodymyr.
Thank you. Is the President of the General Assembly aware of Nobel laureate and pioneer of the microcredit, Professor Muhammad Yunus' current situation in Bangladesh, as reported by the OIR, where he is referred to a prisoner in waiting? And he expressed his extreme concern to Christina Amanpour day before yesterday.
The PJ is following the developments, Mushevik, and I think what the other spokesperson said before, Steph, it remains. And then you are talking about Professor Yunus, and we all know the history and the work of Professor Yunus. He is indeed a good friend of this organization. And where due process has to take place, we are going to wait for the process to take place. But I think the biography of Mr. Yunus speaks for itself. Volodymyr, I give the mic to you, and we'll be finishing here. Thank you so much.
On Friday and Monday,
yes,
the General Assembly considered the situation in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine.
Sure.
The speech of the PGA was very powerful and clear, and he said, while the Security Council may be paralyzed by division, let us draw strength from the collective voice of the General Assembly. He said it demands the immediate, complete, and unconditional withdrawal of Russian military forces from the territory of Ukraine. So the question is whether the President of the General Assembly shares the following proposal for reforming the UN system. The General Assembly should have the right to override the veto of the UN Security Council resolutions. Override.
Well, what the PJ said on Friday in his statement, the statement is online. He also mentioned that this is a needless war, which is a very important point here. In regard with the reform of the Security Council and the other bodies in the organization, like a revitalization of the General Assembly, this is a matter for member states to decide, not for the PJ. But thank you for your question. And I see you on Friday. Thank you so much.